Hi everyone, welcome to episode 8 of For Crying Out Cloud. Today you're learning about hurricanes here with Miss B. Now a hurricane is a tropical disturbance, which just means it's a low pressure center or a storm center, but it forms in the tropics near the equator. It's an area of windy thunderstorms that gains energy as it goes across the ocean surface. And the airflow around the high pressure system toward low pressure is what creates these hurricane storm tracks. Now, hurricane season in the Atlantic is from June 1st to November 30th due to the rise in sea surface temperatures because the ocean gets warmer and instability in the atmosphere. Now, June and July are typically not very intense months for hurricanes, but moving into late August and September, that's when you're going to get to the peak of hurricane formation. And all of these hurricanes begin in the warm waters off the east coast of Africa. So you can see on this map that right here on the east coast of Africa is where all of those little tropical depressions start. They make their way all the way across the ocean, and as they do, they reach the United States, and this bend is when they bounce off of land. Now, the disturbances gain strength off the east coast of Africa, and they become a tropical depression. That's when the counterclockwise circulation and maximum sustained winds are about 38 miles or less. They get upgraded to a tropical storm when that circulation and the winds reach anywhere between 39 and 73 miles an hour. Now, they become classified as a hurricane when it goes from this tropical storm rotation and the sustained winds reach 74 miles or higher. So you can see this is from the GOES satellite, and NASA runs that. You can see a hurricane that's swirling in the Atlantic Ocean, making its way towards Cuba and Florida. You can also see a tropical storm here that's intensifying that could eventually turn into a hurricane. Now, the parts of a hurricane. First of all, you have the eye. That's the hurricane center. It's calm, it's clear, it's about 20 to 40 miles across. Because of all the swirling winds, there's one empty space right in the center. And all the winds die down, the rain suddenly stops, the sky clears, the sun comes out as the eye passes over. And it can last anywhere from 20 to 60 minutes. But that does not mean the storm is over. That means the storm is half over, because then the winds and rain begin and they go from the opposite direction because you have the backside of the storm that is now going to be making landfall. So this is what the eye of the hurricane looks like. It's a central part, it's a central vortex, and everything spins around it, but it's completely clear of all cloud cover. Now, the eye wall is the wall of thunderstorms that surround that eye. That's where the strongest winds of any hurricane are located. And the eye and the eye wall can change as they move. So they can get bigger, they can get smaller, and sometimes you can even get double eye walls. So this is what the eye wall looked like in Hurricane Francis. You can see this is a pretty intense band of thunderstorms right here. Finally, the outer part, the swirly stuff, if you will, of the hurricane are called rain bands. They can go anywhere from 500 to 300 miles out from the eye. And that's where all of the thunderstorms, the rain, the high winds, that's where all of those are situated. Now, Hurricane Andrew, their rain bands only went from the eye to 100 miles out. But Hurricane Gilbert It went from the eye 500 miles out. That determines the size of the hurricane. So you can see all of these swirly things here. That's all your rain bands. Now this is the anatomy of a hurricane. A hurricane is only like a tornado in the fact that it has a central vortex. Otherwise, hurricanes are not like tornadoes at all. This is fueled by moist air that comes off the oceans. All the air that's drawn up into the eye cools and loses moisture, and then it forms a cloud cap over the hurricane. You're not having updrafts and downdrafts that are going through this. Now, once a hurricane makes landfall, that means it's traveling over land. It starts to break apart. It doesn't have the warm water of the ocean anymore, which is like it's gasoline that fuels its rotation. Now, the die out of a hurricane isn't instantaneous, like a tornado just ends. A hurricane breaks apart gradually, and it'll still travel for days over the U.S. as a big band of thunderstorms. And tornadoes can even break out from these if it's a heavy enough band. A hurricane's leftover storms can travel as far north as Canada to drop all their moisture. So right now, it is June 8th, and you'll see this is Tropical Storm Cristobal that made landfall on Sunday, June 7th. And as it's coming through here, you can see as it made landfall, it started to fall apart, but it's moving way north and it's bringing all of that rain and moisture with it. This is the current radar right now at 10:40 p.m. on the 9th of June. And you can see this is the pieces of Cristobal that are still left over. And you can see where we are. It's reached this far north in terms of bands of thunderstorms. Now, for names, tropical depressions get a name. They get a letter when they're first formed, and it corresponds to the name on that year's hurricane list. Now, when the winds from the storms get to 39 miles an hour, the cyclone gets a name. Before 1953, hurricanes weren't given any official names. Their identification came from the year and the place where they made landfall, but that was really confusing. So from 1953 to 1978, hurricanes were only given female names. Beginning in 1979, the National Hurricane Center decided that it would be a good idea to make it both male and female names. So every year, there is a yearly list. It alternates by gender, and it's alphabetical. Now, they use these names because it stops all the confusion if there's two or more tropical cyclones going across the ocean at the same time. Their list is reused every 6 years, and any hurricane that has resulted in substantial damage or death, that name is retired. So you can see these are the 6-year cycle. It's 2020, and what I just showed you was Cristobal, and that's the one that just made landfall and is bringing us thunderstorms on June 9th. This is a list of the retired hurricane names. So far, the count is at 83, and you can see some of the famous ones like Katrina and Sandy and Gilbert. Those are hurricane names that can never be used again because they caused so much damage or they caused so much loss of life. People don't want to be reminded of them. So, Saphir and Simpson. There's some scientists you've never heard of. Herbert Saphir was a civil engineer. He worked on building codes in the state of Florida, and he studied windstorm damage for the United Nations. So he knew a lot about damage to structures after a hurricane. His best friend was Robert Simpson. He was a meteorologist and a hurricane specialist. He was the first director of the National Hurricane Project, and he was a director of the National Hurricane Center. In 1975, Saffer developed a scale to categorize hurricanes by their wind speed, kind of like Ted Fujita with the Fujita scale for tornadoes. And in 1969, his friend Bob Simpson, who was the director at the National Hurricane Center, added information about storm surges and air pressure into the categories, and that became the Saffir-Simpson Hurricane Scale. So this is Herbert Safir, this is Bob Simpson back in the day. This is them later in life. They both lived past 90 and remained best friends. So this is how they measure the hurricanes. You can see each of the categories has a different wind speed and a different amount of feet to the storm surge that comes ashore. You can also see on this what kind of damage. Once you start getting into a category 3, that's where the damage gets really devastating. The National Hurricane Center is located in Miami, Florida. This is where all watches and warnings for Atlantic tropical storm activity come from. And you can see this is places where hurricanes have made landfall. So this is a really good place to put the National Hurricane Center because it's right in the middle of Atlantic hurricane territory. A hurricane watch and warning are totally different than anything we've ever done. With a hurricane watch, there's the possibility that a hurricane will make landfall in 36 hours. You don't have minutes to plan for a hurricane. You have days and hours. So people are told to make preparations, like board up your windows, get your supplies. When there's a hurricane warning, that means the hurricane's going to make landfall within the next 24 hours. So you either need to get to shelter or evacuate, but you have time to do either of those things. It's not an instantaneous thing like a flash flood or a tornado or a blizzard. Now, some of the dangers of hurricanes. Heavy rains, obviously. They have 6 to 12 inches or more that come out of those big rain bands. The heaviest rain occurs to the right of the cyclone track, and it happens 6 hours before and 6 hours after landfall. So the farther it goes in, the more it's going to change things that it interacts with, like rivers and lakes, and it could flood all of those. Large amounts of rain can occur even 100 miles inland and cause flash floods and mudslides. Now, winds clearly are going to be a danger, but they're not as much of a danger as the rains and the storm surge are. More intense the storm, the more wind damage you're going to have, especially if a community's not prepared for it. Storm surge, that is the biggest concern in a hurricane. It's not the wind. It's this storm surge. A storm surge is a large dome of water that comes off the ocean that's being pushed by these heavy winds. It's about 50 to 100 miles wide, and it sweeps ocean water all across the coastline where the hurricane makes landfall. It can be more than 15 feet deep at its peak. So it has a lot of the same characteristics of a tsunami. The level of surge has to do with the intensity of the hurricanes and the winds and the slope of the continental shelf, meaning how deep does the beach go. Storm surge has the greatest potential to kill more people than anything else in a hurricane. So you can see this is what storm surge looks like when it's coming ashore. This is a seawall that's been built to hold it back. You can see that these houses are on stilts, much like tsunami houses would be. But this is the wind actually blowing that 14 to 15 foot surge inland. Now, we've already looked at this map before, and you can see anything in red are high hit areas. This is the Gulf of Mexico. This is the Atlantic. This is where most hurricanes hit. So here's the Carolinas. This is Florida. This is Louisiana. This is Texas. This is where most of the hurricanes hit in the United States. So you can see this is a ranking of the number of deaths from different hurricanes that have occurred in the United States. Most of them are from a long time ago. And that's because we didn't have the high tech that we have now to be able to predict and be able to warn people about these. The only one that's on there that's more recent is Katrina. And that has a lot to do with the fact that Louisiana is built below sea level and they didn't do much to prepare for it before it actually hit. So you can see Galveston up here in 1900, that was the most deaths of 8,000, and they think it could be almost 12,000. Now, the 10 most destructive hurricanes in U.S. history, that's talking about how much it cost to rebuild. And you can see Katrina's right up there at the top of the list with $116 billion. And when it made landfall, it was only a Category 3. In 1992, you had Andrew, and that was $50 billion in damage. So this is the Galveston hurricane. Yes, they had cameras back then. And this is a rail yard. So these are railroad cars, and you can see the rail line right here from the destruction that when the hurricane came ashore. These are people that are walking around through their neighborhood. You can see them standing on boards of other houses. And this, you can see a family standing in front of a house that's been moved quite violently by the hurricane in Galveston in 1900. This is Lake Okeechobee in Florida. This is the second most deadly hurricane that ever happened in 1928. And again, you can see the storm surges come in and flooded whole neighborhoods and has torn houses and everything completely apart. This is Hurricane Andrew in Florida, one of the most expensive there ever was until Katrina came along. And again, you can just see the devastation. It looks a lot like tornado devastation because sometimes they do spawn tornadoes. This is also a picture of Andrew from Florida, and you can see just huge sections of neighborhoods that were destroyed off the coast of the Atlantic Ocean. This is what Katrina looked like. This is the lower Ninth Ward. It's an area that's below sea level. It was not fortified by good levees and seawalls. They were in need of a lot of repair, but because no hurricane had hit them ever, they didn't take it seriously until 2005 when Katrina hit. And you can see the whole lower Ninth Ward is underwater. Those are all houses. This is the coast, and you can see people are on the coast trying to pick up whatever they can, find bodies. There were hundreds of thousands of people that were killed during Katrina. This is Galveston again. This is Hurricane Ike that came ashore in 2008. And this is a road that is right along the seawall on the Atlantic in the Gulf. And you can see the storm surge flying up against the seawall. This is also Ike. This is the aftermath. And again, you can see this is the Gulf of Mexico, and it's pushed boats right up on top of the freeway that runs right along the Gulf of Mexico. This is a picture of Hurricane Harvey. Hurricane Harvey hit Texas in 2017, and all of the rainfall and everything that came through was so intense that it made its way all the way inland to Houston. And you can see this is a 2-story house, and it's completely underwater from the storm surge. Here's a picture of Michael, Hurricane Michael, that came ashore in Florida in 2018. You can see that it can lift whole houses up with that storm surge and devastate everything in its path. And there's the Atlantic Ocean right there. This is a picture of Hurricane Dorian. This just hit the Bahamas and Florida last summer. And you can see this is a before picture of what it looked like with the roads and the houses in the Bahamas. And this is what it looked like after. So you can see everything's flooded out. And here's a picture of that devastation that Dorian caused last year during the 2019 Atlantic hurricane season. So, preparedness. How do you get prepared? First of all, if you live in a hurricane-prone area, you have an emergency kit put together. It has water, flashlights, a portable radio, batteries, blankets, a first aid kit, medication, food, and pet care items. You need to have that at the ready all the time. You need to create an emergency plan with your family, having a meetup destination in case you guys are separated, and to have an evacuation plan. And then listen to the weather updates and be prepared to evacuate if the authorities come and tell you you need to do that. After the hurricane, that's when the big stuff happens. So stay indoors until it's safe to come out. There could be tornadoes still popping up. There could be flooding. All kinds of things could be outside your front door. Check for injured or trapped people without putting yourself in danger. Remember, structures are going to be very unstable. Watch out for flooding, which happens after a hurricane, from the storm surge and the heavy rains. Like you learned in the flood video, never drive through floodwaters. Stay away from any standing water. Down power lines are an absolute given during a hurricane. And remember that electricity flows very quickly through water. Don't drink any tap water until the officials say it's safe to do so. The water treatment plant will have been shut down, and all of the storm sewers will be overwhelmed. So there's a lot of sewage water being mixed into things. Don't drink the tap water. That's why a hurricane kit needs to have water in it. And finally, don't go in the ocean to swim or surf. As fun as it may look, there are these things called riptides, and they're a common danger before and after. And a riptide will suck you under and take you out to very deep water and drown you. So questions to think about. A hurricane is a tropical disturbance of blank pressure. When does Atlantic hurricane season start and end? What is the peak month for Atlantic hurricane season? What direction do hurricanes spin in the northern hemisphere? Where in the ocean do Atlantic hurricanes begin? What is the top wind speed for a tropical depression? And what's the top wind speed for a tropical storm and for a hurricane? What's the name for the calm center of a hurricane? Where are the strongest winds in a hurricane? True or false, rain bands have thunderstorms. How were hurricanes named before 1953? How were they named between 1953 and 1978? And how were they named after 1979? Why are hurricane names retired? What does the Saffir-Simpson scale measure? Where's the National Hurricane Center located? How much time is given for a hurricane watch? And how about a warning? What's the most dangerous part of a hurricane? Which U.S. hurricane had the most deaths? Which U.S. hurricane was the most destructive, meaning it had the highest damage cost? What should be in your hurricane emergency kit? And what are some of the safety concerns after a hurricane has passed? So this is a postcard from Florida. You can see it says, "We are here. Our house is here. car is here. Our dog is here. And I wish that you will be safe, stay healthy, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.